Hello, and welcome back to the Asians Represent podcast. When the Second World War broke out in 1939, the Chinese community was at a crossroads. For some, volunteering for service was a way to demonstrate their commitment to Canada and to serve as a way to gain acceptance. Others questioned why they should fight and potentially die for a country that didn't want them. Ultimately, over 600 Chinese Canadians joined the war effort. When they returned home, they helped transform the very idea of what it meant to be Canadian. For this episode, I had the privilege of sitting down with Dr. Melissa Karmen Lee, CEO of the Chinese Canadian Museum, to talk about how the resilience and sacrifice of Chinese Canadians during the Second World War became a pivotal turning point in the fight for equal rights in Canada. This conversation was recorded during our 2025 production break when I traveled to Vancouver to visit the museum and experience its powerful permanent exhibition, A Soldier for All Seasons. This story is one that really felt personal to me. I've long been passionate about the contributions of Chinese Canadians during the First and Second World Wars. One of the first tabletop RPGs I designed, Ross Rifles, included a section on highlighting the lives of Chinese Canadian soldiers and their stories. Because even through games, we can carry forward history and create new spaces for learning. During our conversation, I learned about Dr. Lee's role at the CCM, a brief history of the institution, and of course, A Soldier for All Seasons. This was an on site recording, and unfortunately, my audio was a bit messed up. But fortunately, Dr. Lee's wasn't. So I've pieced together all of the audio with some commentary for your listening pleasure. So let's start with a little bit of an overview of Dr. Lee's role at the museum, its history, and how it came to be.
We have only existed in this iteration for 2 years. We opened here in our permanent building July 1st, 2023. That's a really important day in Chinese Canadian history because it's the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So that was
Mhm.
why we opened on that day. So, in museum terms, we're really like a toddler.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that new museums are born. So we
hmm
feel very lucky to have us here.
Yeah, I mean, as of today on our recording, there's still construction going on at the museum.
Yes, yes. We like to joke that we do it Asian style. We're in construction, but we're also open to the public.
That's awesome. I mean, I, I think I was talking to the staff earlier, and my impression of this museum is like incredibly positive. I wish this was something that existed when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I often make that comparison when I try to explain what we do. I was born in Vancouver and I grew up here, and I grew up going to museums and art galleries on field trips, like
hmm
everyone does. And the types of art galleries and museums that I was brought to were really entirely white. So we would go to the art gallery or museum and we'd have a docent who was white and who would show us paintings and objects that were made by white people. And really, what it would tell us was this is Canadian culture and this
Yeah.
is what Canadian identity is. And so if you were not of European descent, you would immediately just feel othered. And so by association, you would then say, well, if this is Canadian, then and it doesn't look like me and it's not my family background, then I guess I'm not that. That's
Yeah.
not my culture. So what I think is really positive and important that we exist is that people come here. And so an example is our first exhibition on Chinese Canadian migration, Odysseys and Migration. So even people that are non-Chinese, kids that are non-Chinese that come and they really learn about the Chinese Canadian story, even if they're not Chinese, the fact that they're learning that Chinese people were here since 1788 and Chinese migration is part of Canada's story. Chinese Canadian history is Canadian history. It allows people that are non European descent to feel like, well, I don't look like really the majority too. And so maybe my culture also matters the way this
Hmm.
culture does. So I think in a wider scope, it does, I think, help bring a more diverse narrative to Canada.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful line. The Chinese Canadian history is Canadian history. I've never
Well,
heard that before.
that's I mean, well, not to get political here at all,
You
but
can get political. It's
well, that's that's really a line that the previous prime minister said to us. So when
oh, really?
yeah, so when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came to visit us, so he came uh, last year.
Right.
He visited us in Vancouver. We were the only museum he visited. And he gave a little talk to the Chinese Canadian community here. And that is something that really resonated. He said it, a lot, like a couple times, which was Chinese Canadian history is Canadian history.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's incredibly powerful. I didn't know that Trudeau said that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we felt really great. Like
Right.
I think in the end it wasn't necessarily about the politics or the fact um whether or not you like his party or like his role as prime minister. I think what was important to us is that the Prime Minister of Canada came to visit us less than 2 years after we opened. So it showed how important we were as a museum to the federal government
Yeah.
and how our community, the Chinese Canadian community, actually mattered.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so I mean on that note, the inception of this museum. Like is this a federally funded museum? Is it a private institution?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, that goes back a little bit to uh, the founding of the museum, which
Mhm.
I'll kind of, in a really quick nutshell, explain. So, for me, and I don't know if it's for you as well, growing up in Vancouver, I learned very little about Chinese Canadian history. The only thing I learned about was a little bit about the head tax,
Right.
and a little bit about railroad.
I'm aware that despite being a Canadian podcast, the majority of our audience is actually outside of Canada. So I want to provide some valuable context here. The Chinese Canadian contribution to the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway in the 1880s might be one of the few pieces of Chinese Canadian history that people are aware of. And it's all because of a series of 50 60-second short films belonging to a series called Canadian Heritage Minutes. These were short films that aired between 1990 and 1995 that were 60 seconds long. And what they did was they illustrated important moments in Canadian history. And in 1990, an episode called Nitro was released, and this was all on public TV. In this episode, a young Chinese Canadian railway worker basically risks his life to set a dangerous explosive nitroglycerin charge to help build the railway. And for many, including myself, this was the first time actually seeing Chinese Canadian history on TV. These episodes are still available online to watch. So what I'll do is I'll make sure I put the link in the show notes on both, our podcast feed and our YouTube channel.
Only the Chinese people ever paid a tax to enter and immigrate to Canada.
Hmm.
And it was first $50 and then 100 and then 300 and then $500. Total amount given by Chinese people was 23 million
Mm.
Canadian dollars. In today's dollars, it's 1.5 billion.
Yeah,
And half of that 23 million went to the province of BC.
right.
And so another thing to know is that the Canadian Railroad cost 23 million to build. So in
Hmm.
essence, the Chinese paid for the railroad as well as built it
Yes.
in Canada. Um, so 2006, the federal government uh, basically gave a full apology to the Chinese Canadians to apologize for the head tax and for the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Hmm.
And that policy or that apology with the conservative government really triggered a change in education and curriculum across the country. And so from then onwards, there was more integration
Right.
of Chinese Canadian history into curriculum. So, as an example, my kids, they are in public school here in Vancouver. In grade 5 now, you learn about the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Really?
You do, yeah. And also, there's a big study on it in grade 10 here in
Like in like
BC
a civics in the
in
civics
like
class?
social studies and
Okay.
history. So that has been integrated since we were kids.
Wow.
And part of it
I didn't
is
know
that
that.
apology that created that.
Hmm.
So that is a change, right, from the 80s. Um, the other thing connected to this apology is after the federal government gave that apology in 2017, the provincial government under the NDP John Horgan government also apologized to
Hmm.
the Chinese people, but they didn't just apologize, they committed to building a Chinese Canadian museum.
Oh,
So the
okay.
apology came with an action plan. And so
Hmm.
that action plan was to build us. And so they gave the Chinese Canadian community here $1 million, really just to begin consultation, fact finding, figure out whether it's even possible to build a brand new museum,
Right.
right? Museums are expensive and it's not straightforward figuring out how and what the community would like. And so that million was to kind of figure it all out. And then fast forward really to today and to 2022, the province of BC ended up giving over $30 million. And that money was used to buy this building that we're in right now,
Yeah.
as well as set us up with an $8 million endowment. All museums need an endowment. Otherwise, it's just a really key part of how we survive.
Hmm.
Um, and then really just to get us started. And so since then, we've received money from the federal government, the provincial government, as well as from the city of Vancouver.
Yeah.
And that is where we are today in this building. We don't have operating funding, but we do as what other museums do. We apply for grants. I go around to government relations. I look for corporate sponsorship and also private philanthropy.
Yeah, I noticed there's a whole wall with all the names of donors and everything like that right by the front desk.
Yeah, and a key part of the province's condition of how they would give us money, it was not here's some money, no strings attached. It was here's some money, but also you need to raise an X amount from the community to
Hmm.
match this funding. So it was actually matching funding,
Right.
and we had to show that the community supported us.
There was investment in it from the
Yeah, there was
community.
investment, economic investment from the community as well as the government together to build this museum.
Does the museum collaborate with benevolent societies?
We
Anything like
do.
that?
And I myself am part of one of the oldest benevolent
Which one?
societies. I'm part of, in Chinese, it's called the Lam Sai Hao Tong.
Okay, yeah.
So, do you
My
know them?
my
Oh,
family's in the Longgong
oh,
Association.
really?
Yeah, my
Yeah.
grandfather was the president of the Toronto branch for a really long
Oh,
time. I was actually just at their clubhouse a week ago. Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, so my grandfather was part of the one here.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
And my father's a part of it, my uncle's a part of it. And that, the lambs one, so it's the lamb, limb, lum, because it's all the same in Chinese,
Yep.
right? Like the forest, the two forest characters, the tree characters. That building in Vancouver, Chinatown, which
Is it
is,
near here?
yeah, it's just right over there.
Oh,
I
okay.
can point it
One
out.
of my friends who
Yeah.
I'm traveling with, she's a limb.
Yeah, so that's that building, and they are the second oldest building in Chinatown. We're the oldest; they're
This
the
one right
second
here.
oldest. Yeah, and it's the clans, the benevolent associations or the clans
Hmm.
are still pretty active here in Vancouver, Chinatown. They really support us. We have a fundraising gala every year. They always come to our
Yeah.
fundraising gala. We have like 10 to 15 tables, about 120, 130 people.
Wow.
There are a lot of different clans here. And it feels like, that's a really key part of people that support us.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally love it, not just because of my family, but because it gives me an opportunity to have meetings in Cantonese,
Right.
which I always love and I miss from when I lived in Hong Kong.
Hmm.
So, mhm.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I asked that question is because I was curious to see if there was investment from different generations.
Yes, there definitely is. Our board is kind of veers towards, I think, more like a boomer generation.
Right.
And I think it's because we have people like the very first Chinese Canadian Supreme Court judge. We
Hmm.
have like the very first associate dean business school who's a Chinese woman. Like, so a lot of firsts of
Yeah.
Chinese Canadians are in my board, which is why they're kind of veering towards the boomer generation.
Of course. Yeah.
The clans, yes, they are also veering older, though they are trying to kind of interest the younger generation.
Yeah.
But they, I mean, I think that they, and that's like a whole separate conversation, but they need to do different things to interest the younger generation. Like one thing that I wish they would do is they would allow membership even if you were not from the paternal side of
Mm,
entry. So I'm a Lamb member because it's my dad's last name,
yeah.
but if it was my mom's last name, I wouldn't be allowed in, right?
Right. Yeah. My
Yeah.
mom is a Chong,
Yeah.
but she's a Chong because her father, who was a Moon, was adopted by Chongs
Yeah.
when they came here.
It's very patrilineal,
Yeah.
the clans. And that made sense in the generations um, right before the Exclusion Act because they definitely was only men here.
Yes. Of course.
So, and then I think the ratio of men to women at that time was 26 men to 1 woman.
Yeah.
And part of that, of course, is because every Chinese person that has to come by has to pay a head tax. So if you're from a Chinese family in a village, you're only able to scrape up enough money to pay for one person to come. Usually it's the person that can make more money to slowly bring over the family, and it's the man that comes first.
It's an ordeal. I had the opportunity to visit the Museum of Chinese in America
Oh,
in New York,
yes.
and
I know them too.
they had a fantastic exhibition on the Chinese typewriter and the
Yes.
development of that. It was so cool. But
Yes.
I learned about the practice and concept of paper suns,
Yes.
and it got me
Mhm.
to start talking to my maternal grandfather about that.
Yeah.
Because he was like he owned some of the early Chinese restaurants in Toronto, and he owned a Taiwanese newspaper too.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about those parts of the sort of like my family's history, but also like the Chinese experience. I wanted to step back really quick because
Sure.
you've mentioned the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is also the same as the Chinese Immigration Act,
So it's
right?
legally called the Chinese Immigration Act, but it's colloquially called the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Is that
Yeah.
because that's what it was called in the United States?
No, so in the Senate, it was ratified as the Chinese Immigration Act.
Okay.
But when you call it that, it feels like something related to Chinese being able to
Yeah, it
immigrate.
doesn't have
But
the negative connotation.
yeah, it doesn't have a negative connotation, but it actually, the act was meant to exclude Chinese people. So
Yeah.
that's why people call it colloquially the Chinese Exclusion Act. And the fact that it was ratified on July 1st,
Hmm.
1923, shows you, that's Canada Day. And so that just shows you how it was really tied to patriotism of Canadians, of white Canadians, and
Yes.
how they felt that really excluding Chinese on that day related to reaffirming their white Canadian identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Chinese Exclusion Act wasn't repealed until 1947,
It was not
right?
repealed until 47. And it was a really long time for families to be separated.
Hmm.
Our first exhibition, The Paper Trail, is really all about the Chinese Exclusion Act. It really tells that story of the paper sons and daughters, and it tells that story of how men were here and they were separated from their family for 23 years because of the Exclusion Act. All their families were in China.
At this point of the recording, we shifted the topic to A Soldier for All Seasons, which at the time was the newest permanent exhibition at the museum, which told the story of Chinese Canadians during the Second World War. And one of the focal points of this exhibition was Force 136. If you've never heard of Force 136, I'm not surprised, but you're going to learn a lot about them. So, Force 136 was a branch of the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, during the Second World War. And it was comprised of Southeast Asian operatives, but also 150 Chinese Canadians. Um, these Chinese Canadians were picked because it was believed that they would blend in with the locals and could speak the language. And their missions were very covert, and they were essentially sent into Japanese occupied Southeast Asia to support and train local resistance movements in like guerrilla warfare, but also to sabotage Japanese supply lines and equipment. And so a lot of the exhibition at the Chinese Canadian Museum featured artifacts from Force 136 and stories about some of its members. Force 136 was a really important moment in Chinese Canadian history because it was an opportunity for Chinese Canadians to demonstrate their courage and skills and loyalty to Canada.
I think, what's really interesting, and you should definitely read this book, The Riveter.
Is
Um,
that sold here? Because I'll
it
buy a copy
is.
right after this.
It's sold here at The Riveter. It's by Jack Wang.
Okay.
And he's originally from here. He teaches in the States. That book is all about a mixed race love story between Chinese Canadian soldier. Uh, and it's a World War II story.
Is it based on a real story?
He looked through like different historical records. It's based on several kind of real stories that he
Oh, cool.
crafted into one soldier. But of course, mixed race marriages were illegal
Yeah.
then. And so he, what's interesting is, so it's all about the war and how he enlisted in war. But he couldn't marry his, the, the woman that he was in love with, the white Canadian woman, because if he married her, then she would lose her Canadian citizenship.
Really?
Because he, even though he was born in Canada and she was not, she was considered Canadian and he was not. And if they married, she would lose her
Hmm.
citizenship. So part of the reason he went to war and part of the reason why a lot of these Chinese Canadian soldiers went to war was to change legislation.
Yeah.
They thought that if they proved that their patriotism, if they would risk their lives for Canada, then it would change the perception of the way Canadians and the government viewed Chinese people, and it would allow the Chinese community the right to vote. And that's exactly what happened.
Hmm.
Over 600 Chinese Canadian soldiers enlisted in World War II. And then when they came back from the war, we got the right to vote.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting because that is the same mentality that Chinese Canadians had when they fought in World War One.
Yes,
It's it's a way to demonstrate your commitment to Canada. But then there were also those who kind of were apathetic about it. Why fight for a country that didn't even recognize you as a human being?
for sure. And that's kind of in a way that also really makes sense that
Yeah,
you wouldn't fight for a country that refuses to give you citizenship.
yeah,
So I think it's a complex story. I think that it's true, you know, it's an often overlooked story. And when I go to the War Museum in Ottawa, there is no Chinese Canadian content at all. Um,
I saw a really beautiful artifact actually in the curatorial center.
oh,
When we
okay.
were doing our research for Ross Rifles, we spent
Yeah.
several hours in the curatorial center looking at artifacts. And one
Yeah.
of them was a shell, like an artillery shell, that a Chinese Canadian soldier had turned into a piece of art, and it had carvings on it in
Oh,
Chinese.
that's so
I don't know
nice.
if it's online or anything like that, but it was one of the most beautiful pieces there.
That's so nice.
But it's not on display.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I think it's also partly because a lot of the, so the main exhibition at the War Museum is permanent.
Hmm.
And that means it was made a long time ago. And so it's complicated to update what are considered permanent exhibitions.
Hmm.
That's why, for me, and a lot of the exhibitions we have here, they're temporary because the more you make exhibitions temporary, the more stories that you can tell.
Absolutely.
So that's a really kind of key part of what we try to do here. Um, but I think, with A Soldier for All Seasons, we knew when we created the Chinese Canadian Museum that we really had to tell that story because we would not have the right to vote if not for their sacrifice. So that complex story we really did want to tell. And we partnered with the Chinese Canadian Military Museum. That's them across the
Yeah,
street.
that's my next stop after
Oh,
this.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they really lent us a lot of the artifacts and
Hmm.
helped us with the storytelling. My favorite artifact in the exhibition is one that was really kind of given to us just by a visitor who emailed us out of the blue. In his family, his father had to recuperate here from at Shaughnessy Hospital in Vancouver at the time, and he did a lot of needlework while he was recuperating.
Oh.
So he did a very beautiful needlework tapestry, which we put in the exhibition, and I love it because it really deconceptualizes what you think soldiers are, like
Hmm.
ideas about masculinity and
Oh
what
yeah.
they consider important. And so that needlework tapestry really creates like a soft element to the exhibition, which I think is important too.
Definitely. And that's in the same case as the photo of the gentleman swimming, right?
I
Is that the
think so.
one?
It's the one where like there's a old headphones as
Yes,
well.
yeah, the
Yeah, yeah,
Force
yeah. Hmm.
136
Yeah,
display. Yeah,
yeah.
I listened to all of the audio bits there.
Cool.
It was really cool. And I think you're right in pointing out that this is one of the most important stories to tell
For
about,
sure.
Chinese civil rights.
Yes, that's really what it is. It's about civil rights. The other thing about this exhibition that I felt was really important was I wanted people to understand that it was a young person's war. So
Yes.
when you think about World War II, most people they think it was a long time ago and they think everyone's old. Like their immediate impression is veterans are old and this war is in black and white. Just like general imagery when you
Hmm.
think about it. And so I really wanted to destabilize that conception as well. Like that's so I thought, how do we make it so people understand that first of all, young people gave up their lives. Secondly, it has to really come alive for them in some way. So what we decided to do was work with a colorist, and that professional colorist helped us color the black and white photos so they would feel more contemporary. And the
Uh-huh.
other thing we did was we were so lucky to receive this donation of a holobox that there's this Chinese Canadian company in Vancouver, and they make what are called hollow boxes, like hologram
Yeah,
box.
it's the actors that were playing the different soldiers and telling their stories.
Exactly. So it's basically like a hologram, and then we have the soldiers inside. We engaged Chinese Canadian actors and they dressed up in the uniforms and then they really told the stories of the soldiers. So they actually look and feel like they're standing next to you and they're telling the story of how they died. And so
Hmm.
that I felt was really important. And it's been really kind of um, important and emotional when people come in and they listen to that story.
Yeah, I think it is definitely one of the most high tech features in the entire museum.
Sure.
It was one of the things I was most surprised about. I I was here with some friends and I was just like I was giddy over the exhibition.
So great.
I think so. For context, Force 136 was a branch of the British Special Operations Executive, which is the precursor to MI6. And they Force 136 did covert missions based in Japanese-occupied Southeast Asia, where Chinese Canadians were trained as spies, and I'm using the word spies is very specific in the exhibition too, to basically go and locate, support, and train resistance fighters because they trusted the Chinese face, essentially.
Well, and it was called Operation Oblivion because they thought they would never come back.
Yeah.
And really, if you think about it, Chinese Canadians, like Chinese people that were born and grew up here, they don't speak any Chinese.
My grandparents on my dad's side don't speak any English at all.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
now my Chinese is bad.
I mean, very few, like probably for them, a lot of them, it was their first time ever that they went to Southeast Asia, to Malaysia. How could they pretend to be Malaysian, right?
Yeah.
Like no one would really believe these people were Malaysian, but it's because, you know, with white people, they're like, oh, you have an Asian face, you can blend in. Like probably not, right?
Yeah.
So it was called Operation Oblivion and they didn't expect them to come back, but some of them did. And they were not allowed to tell the story of, because it was like MI6, it was a secret. And so they actually kept that secret until very recently, only a couple years, that they started telling their relatives, their kids about it.
Yeah, the Henry Wong was one of the those 13 Chinese Canadians originally in Operation Oblivion, and he smuggled a camera into the training.
Yes.
And 60 years after, they released like all these photos.
Yeah.
And they're young guys.
I know. It's heartbreaking, really. Yeah, to think about it, how young they were.
And I think that, you know, I don't think I know that our audience is not necessarily into military history,
Right.
but I think this isn't even an exhibition about war. This is an exhibition about, again, like I said earlier, like civil rights.
It is.
This is not just like the literal fight against fascism,
right?
But this is also the right to exist in Canada.
Exactly. Too. And you know what's also interesting is that even though Chinese men tried to enlist, they were often not accepted.
Yes.
And so, Jack Wang talks about that story in his book, how the main character, it was very tough as a Chinese man to be accepted to fight in World War II if you were trying to go into enlistment offices in BC, because there were more Chinese people here, and they were really automatically rejected because the government didn't want them to enlist, because they knew also that the more Chinese people enlisted, the more argument they would have in order to have the right to vote.
Yep.
So in that book, the character actually goes to Ontario, where there are less Chinese people, and then becomes accepted there to enlist in the war.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's also interesting because it wasn't even just like they volunteered and they were accepted. They were turned away. So they had to enlist several times, different offices, before really they were finally accepted.
I know that Wei Tian Louis in World War I rode a horse across the Mounties to go to like Calgary to enlist because it couldn't do it here.
Yeah, so that's often the case. They had to leave BC and go somewhere more remote where there were less Chinese people. Offices were more desperate in order to have enlistment recruitments to fill their quota. And so that's how they would enlist. So it was like tough, even though they were trying to give up their lives.
Yeah, they wanted to fight. People didn't want. There's even a quote in the exhibition here that says like, I think they just saw my name and just threw it in the trash.
Yeah.
And I know that there are also, I think this is more of the case of World War I, but I learned this from Jack Jin, that because like Lee is a common British last name, there are likely more Chinese people who fought in the war for Canada, but there are no confirmed records of them because people thought they were white.
Yes, Lee can also be a British name. Lamb can also be a British name.
Really?
As well, but with the B at the end.
Oh, Lamb,
right?
of course, yeah. Oh, I never thought about that. So, but I guess the records from World War II were a little bit more comprehensive than World War I.
Yeah, I think so. Jack would really know more about that.
I guess I have to do a follow-up.
Yeah.
I'll have to do a follow-up. But I want to thank you for your time.
Sure.
This has been honestly an eye-opening experience and really inspirational for me.
Oh,
Just kind
great.
of being
Yeah.
here, and I think being in Vancouver and being surrounded by, like, we're actually staying in Richmond,
Oh,
and just
nice.
being surrounded by so many Chinese people,
Yeah,
and then seeing institutions like this trying to, like, continue to teach people about our history here, not just for Chinese people to know where their rights came from, but also like non-Chinese people, like you said, to kind of broaden everyone's perspectives.
for sure.
I
Yeah.
wanted to end with a question that I had for you, and it's about the museum.
Mhm.
Um, in like 5 years,
Mhm.
what do you want the museum to be like in 5 years? What do you want to have achieved as like the CEO of this museum in 5 years?
Um, so I think for me, so in 5 years the museum will be 7 years old.
Hmm.
I really hope that we have sustained operating funding. That's really important. I'm always thinking about finances, like for the museum. So it's also continuity, right? Um, and so that's really important. I think what's also important is that we are considered a major tourist destination in Vancouver.
Right.
We're really kind of doing good getting there. We won the Governor General's Award last year for museums in Canada. Only three in BC have ever won. We're the
Wow.
third. Uh, I think that there are museums that people think about in Canada that are world class, like the ROM
Yep.
is one. The Aga Khan is also a
It's another
great,
beautiful museum.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I would really aspire to be a museum that can collaborate and that comes to people's mind when they think of a museum that's doing great, new, innovative things. We have an opportunity for us because we are new. We can take what museums have been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years, but we don't have to take everything. We can do things in a different way. So, as we talked about, we can use more cool technology to tell our story.
Yeah.
Um, we don't have a lot of the hangups that a lot of colonial museums might
Yes.
have. And our staff are young. Most of our staff are millennial or younger, Gen Z.
Hmm.
If you walk through, you'll see that. And so we have a different generational attitude about the way we want to see culture displayed, produced, and consumed.
It's actually why I asked initially about the funding of the museum,
Right.
because I know that you know operating a museum isn't easy, and you're beholden to like a board,
Yes.
and everybody has their own agendas, and it's
Yes.
how do you sustain the message and the mission of the museum while juggling all of these agendas?
I mean, I think it's a compromise. I think it's always good to hear everyone's perspective, right? And
Hmm.
generationally that might be different. It's also helpful that we're all Asian.
Yeah.
So it's like sometimes it feels like a conversation with your auntie or uncle who's
Right.
trying to
Of
tell
course.
you the best way, right? Because they're a CPA expert, they know accounting and audit, and
Hmm.
I don't know. That's not my background, and um, I'm a curator, and I can explain what I do, but I think the tension is different. There's less tension because it feels like we're a big family.
Yeah.
Because in the way that even people you don't know in Chinese families or relatives, when you meet them for the first time and they're older than you call them auntie, uncle.
Yep.
So a little bit like that's the way it feels like when you're running the museum and you're talking to your board or your donors, right? So you respect them in that way. And so that's a really good feeling and a good way to think about running a cultural organization.
Right. Yeah. There's that shared mission, but there's also the cultural dynamics
Yes, which
at play.
is a lot more easy because you're both from that same cultural dynamic. So
Of
there's an
course.
element of respect there that's different. I mean, I would equate it more to a lot of indigenous organizations.
Yeah.
I have a friend that runs the Haida Gwaii Museum in Haida Gwaii, and she talks a lot too about her aunties and uncles on the
Hmm.
board. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But that said, I really want to kind of give our audience the opportunity to learn more about this. Where can people go if they want to learn more about the Chinese Canadian Museum and the topics that we've discussed?
So, of course, the website, ChineseCanadianMuseum.ca. We do Instagram, CC Museum BC, posts as well as kind of more fun stories. We have a TikTok as well,
Oh, really?
which yes,
Okay, I'm gonna look that up.
our Gen Z marketing intern runs currently, and we do some fun things there. Um, and I mean, subscribe. The best is just to also subscribe to us.
Yeah.
And oh, one
And you folks have a
thing,
podcast.
we have a podcast. It's called The Schoolroom. The reason why it's called The Schoolroom is because we actually have a schoolroom in the museum where Hosea met you at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the oldest schoolrooms in Vancouver. It was established in 1914 as a schoolroom. So that's why our podcast is called The Schoolroom. We record in there. One thing I want to say is we have a thing called the Campus Culture Pass, which is sponsored by BMO. And so if you are in college, university, if you have a student card, it's $5 only to enter the museum and have an annual pass.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's all across North America. So if you come to visit us, it's only $5 and you can come all year round and you'd have a membership.
I want to extend a token of gratitude to Dr. Melissa Karmen Lee of the Chinese Canadian Museum for the opportunity to have some of her time, insight, and to learn about how she is stewarding Chinese Canadian stories through this institution. If this conversation resonated with you, I really encourage you to try to visit the Chinese Canadian Museum. Check out the A Soldier for All Seasons exhibitions and all of the other wonderful installations that they have in the museum. Uh, if you are unable to, come to Canada, that's okay. Check out the Canadian Heritage Minutes. Watch Nitro for the first time, and after that, maybe spend some time reflecting on how remembrance through media like that, through games or through museums, can help create a more inclusive and understanding world. And as always, thank you for listening to the Asians Represent podcast. And a special thank you goes to our patrons, Meadowweave Games, Valorous Games, um, Michelle, most honorable Epic Impulse, our most honorable patrons at patreon.com/AZNS represent. We really appreciate you and, of course, our wider community. That said, as I wrap up, I just want to kind of reinforce that I think the quality of the show is very important to us, more so than quantity. So I think what we're going to be doing is focusing on monthly releases this year. I've got a bunch of episodes that are in development, alongside, of course, our monthly No Dice, No Problem episodes. So that said, if you want to stay in touch, if you want to stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Asians Represent and our community, join our Discord server. Of course, you can also support us at Patreon. Head to patreon.com/AZNSrepresent and look forward to seeing us at a future gaming convention.